Before starting, let me briefly introduce today's speaker. Today's speaker is Shuriya Banerjee from Friedrich Alexander University. She received a PhD from TIFR, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research at 2018. And after that, she worked as a postdoc fellow at Ben Gurion University. And from 2020, she has been in a new position in Friedrich Alexander University. Okay, so today she's going to talk about observational constraint on superfluid dark matter models. So, Shuriya, please start your presentation.
Thanks a lot for the nice introduction. And first, I would like to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to present my work here. So today I will be talking about my works that are mainly based on finding observational constraints on, as we were discussing, on superfluid dark matter models, so the model parameters from two different areas of study. So those mainly, these are non-relativistic limits where we have worked on mainly. So how much we can constrain the model parameter for this superfluid dark matter models. So that I will be discussing today. So the main motivation behind this superfluid dark matter model lies basically twofold. So first is that, as we know that lambda CDM, it can explain the cosmic history, the rotation curves, and of course the CMB and everything very accurately till date. But also we know that there are still some fully unresolved problems at smaller scales, that is at galactic scales. For example, the baryonic Tully-Fisher relation, which is a relation between the high mass end of the galaxies and as how it is related to the dispersion velocities. And so lambda CDM predicts a larger scatter, but it has a very tight correlation, these two quantities. Similarly, the cusp core problem, the lambda CDM predicts a cuspy core for the center of the galaxy, but as we know from observations, we mainly got that the core should be flat. And then there is this too big to fail problem, the over prediction of this too dense and too massive satellite dwarf galaxies by this CDM compared to the observations. But as we know, so these were a few drawbacks or few issues of CDM that people are still working on. But if we also know there exists another theory which is known as the MOND, or modified Newtonian dynamics, that modifies the Newtonian law between interacting bodies in the non-relativistic regime. It can explain the galactic dynamics, for example, the baryonic Tully-Fisher relation or the flattening of the galaxy curves pretty accurately. But however, this MOND, people have tried to obtain several relativistic versions, for example, TeVis, but it has still failed to explain the CMB observations without the inclusion of DM dark matter as such. Therefore, we see, therefore, the main idea of the superfluid model is to find the CDM MOND hybrids. So theories that are well behaved at both large scale as well as small scales, with small scale behavior mimicking MOND and the large scale behavior mimicking the CDM. And this class of models takes into consideration the interacting dark matter baryon picture, where this interaction is MOND-like. So the Mondian-like force acts between this dark matter and baryon, and through this force, if they interact, then the problems and issues that are there in both the models are basically totally the CDM MOND hybrids. They can be it's a way of resolution for such problems. So let me just briefly tell you about this MOND. For this modified Newtonian dynamics, as I said, it corresponds to a modification to the Newtonian force law that changes the dynamics of interaction between two massive bodies in the non-relativistic limit. So it was first proposed by Milgrom, And as you can see, equation 1 denotes the modified force law that that was proposed in this theory, so where this Gn corresponds to the normal Newtonian acceleration, and G is the actual acceleration, effective acceleration. So when for in the scales where in the high acceleration scale, so the system goes to the normal Newtonian mode. However, in the low acceleration regime, it goes to the modified version where G is equal to the square root of Gn and A naught. A naught here is the model parameter, and which from observation was found to be interestingly or equivalent to the Hubble parameter. So it is like 10 to the minus 10 meter per second square. So this theory was able to explain the flat galaxy rotation curves for a large number of galaxies. Also, it was able to accurately derive the baryonic Tully-Fisher relation. And it was other than this, it was able to explain several other galactic observations like planar structures, low merger rates, and so on. So now let me directly go to the superfluid models. So a brief overview of this model. What is the main constituents? So as we know that the main constituent of this model is basically they are made up of very light axion-like particles, and they undergo phase transition, which is a normal property of any superfluid at some specific scale determined by the temperature. And so beyond the scale, they basically form this superfluid. And at galactic scale, the theory was formulated in a way that at the galactic scale, the superfluid behavior was the dominant one. And so the entire DM behaved like a collective excitation, like a condensate, for made up of excitations or phonons rather than individual particles. And these phonon modes then mediate a Mondian-like force between the visible matter by coupling to baryons. And finally, in clusters, because the temperature is higher, dispersion velocity is also higher. So it corresponds to a mixture, either a mixture of normal fluid and superfluid, or it was completely made up of DM particles. So it completely depends on what scale and temperature we are studying the system. So in the non-relativistic regime, it is normally described by the effective theory of superfluid by this scalar field. These phonons are described by the scalar field theta over here. The Lagrangian is given by the general form of the Lagrangian is given by this equation 2, provided it satisfies all the Galilean invariants and everything, the transformations. So it is given by this equation 2 over here, where this x have this form depending on this spatial and the temporal derivative of the scalar field theta, and this phi over here corresponds to the Newtonian potential. In this model that we have studied for that we have tried to constrain, so we have so there are like you can have two superfluids coexisting together or a single superfluid. So it depends like what we are exactly trying to reproduce. For example, in dark energy and also one can produce acceleration if we consider the presence of two superfluids together. But however, because we are mainly here we are mainly bothered about how one can explain the CDM drawbacks with this theory. So we have mainly studied this theory, this particular model given by equation 3 over here, where there is only single superfluid described by the scalar field theta. And this action over here, Px, is given by this form over here, 3. As you can see, this x has a fractional power of 3/2. And this lambda here is a model parameter. So it mainly determines the strength, or rather you can say the range of interaction, how much, what is the range of the superfluid core. So that is determined by lambda. Finally, as we know, we are considering an interacting superfluid over here that interacts with the baryons. So, and we want a Mondian-like interaction. So motivated by that, the interaction Lagrangian was considered to be given by equation 4, where alpha again is a model parameter that determines the strength of interaction. So the main motivation behind the choice of this power 3/2, though is somewhat arbitrary, but the main motivation lies in the fact that one should obtain the Mond-like dynamics from the superfluid DM. So if one studies the non-relativistic equation of motion, and one sees that with this kind of a fractional power, one is able to get Mond-like behavior at galactic levels when baryons are also included. And one also has seen that such fractional powers are indeed present in, like, for example, unitary Fermi gas or in ultra cold atoms. So a fractional power of 5/2 has indeed been obtained. One has seen such a thing. So it's not like exactly completely unknown to us. And as I said, that this particular interaction ensures a Mond-like force. So there are all over there are basically 3 model parameters. However, we know that the mass should be equivalent to that of an axion-like particle. So the mass range is somewhat constrained, but this lambda and alpha are the main the unconstrained parameters for this theory till now. So directly going to cosmology. So firstly, we have tried in the first work, we have tried to constrain the model parameter through cosmological perturbations in the linear regime, and try to see how much we can constrain the parameter space. So firstly, for that, we need to understand the background cosmology, what bounds we can already get from the background study of the equation of state and the equation of motion. So from here, as we can see, this is a 3-body interaction. So motivated by that, the equation of state can easily be shown to be given by this equation 5 over here. As you can see, it is inversely proportional to the mass and this lambda over here. So lambda naught is basically the same lambda that I was just now showed you, the model parameter. So as we know, for background cosmology, we want it to be like behavior should be like CDM. So it should behave, though the superfluid should behave mimic the dust-like behavior. So for that, we need to have this W much less than 1. So this gives a bound on this lambda naught already from background cosmology. So if we consider that the initial conditions are satisfied at matter radiation equality, where rho, this density is given as 0.4 EV4, we then get a lower bound on this lambda naught, which is given by this equation 6. Of course, it depends on the mass also. So if we have a given mass, for example, a reasonable value of mass, allowed value for axion-like particle, for example, m equal to 0.6, one can easily get the lower bound on lambda naught. So for mass equal to 0.6 eV, a lambda naught should be much greater than 0.5 eV. So from here, this is the first bound that one gets from cosmological background study. Then one goes to the evolution of density, background density, of course. So this from the Lagrangian, so we consider everything homogeneous at this stage. So equation 7 gives the Lagrangian corresponding to the background evolution of the phonon theta over here. From here, one gets the resulting equation of motion for theta as given by equation 8, you can see. So this, the second term corresponds to the dust-like behavior, and the first term is the modification. However, again, we know that we want, so from equation 9, we can see that how the density gets modified. But we again know that we want the background cosmology to be same as what we normally get from lambda CDM. So here, once again, if we want that dust-like behavior be the dominating one, then one again gets some constraint on this first term over here. So if we try to get a dust-like behavior, one see that one can derive a constraint on this alpha parameter, assuming that the earlier already obtained constraint on the lambda naught is satisfied. So for a given mass, equation 11, you can see that one gets an upper bound on this alpha parameter from this background cosmology. So if we have a mass, we know the mass of the axion particle, one can easily say what should be the upper bound on this alpha parameter and the lower bound on this lambda parameter. So these were the two bounds that we got from background study itself. However, in order to go to the next stage, we need to study perturbations. So in this work, we mainly constrain in the linear regime. Of course, one needs to go to the, in order to have a full idea and compare it with data, one needs to go to the non-linear regime and compare it with CMB data. So this was mainly to have a first-hand idea of what we are about to get from this cosmological perturbation study. So for this, we see that equation 12 corresponds to the total Lagrangian for this theory. So this first term corresponds to this x to the power 3 by 2, which we know. And the second term here corresponds to the interaction term over here. Then because it's fluid dynamics, so one needs to derive the hydrodynamical equations, the Navier-Stokes and the continuity equation. For that, one goes to the Hamiltonian theory. From here, one can see equation 13 gives the Hamiltonian for this theory, and pi theta corresponds to the conjugate momentum for this phonon mode theta. And finally, the Hamiltonian equation of motions are given by these two equations for this theta dot and pi theta dot. As you can see, if we compare it, the one that we get from CDM, we of course get modifications at this stage itself. So now we need to define the hydrodynamical variables in order to study the equations of motion. So from here, we define the density as m pi theta and the peculiar velocity, or rather not peculiar, sorry, the 4 velocity as proportional to the gradient of this theta. And then we further break down the potential from the Poisson equations. So we break down the gravitational potential into this homogeneous and this phi, small phi coming from the inhomogeneities. Similarly, we also break the velocity. So this corresponds to the Hubble flow, the first term, and the second term corresponds to the peculiar velocity. H is of course the Hubble parameter, and L here corresponds to the proper distance in this case. So finally, we get the two fluid equations given by equation 17 and 18. So as you can see, there are model parameters entering at this stage, which modifies the fluid equations for both the velocities as well as the density. So then we perturb the densities as well as the background quantities, that is theta as well, rho m and rho b, into this, with all this with bar corresponds to the background homogeneous quantities, and this delta terms corresponds to the inhomogeneous one. So the complete evolution equation, if we substitute all these perturbations at linear regime, is given by equation 19. And as you can see, this term proportional to this divergence square, it basically corresponds to the prefactor gives the velocity, sound speed. So from here, you get an expression for the sound speed directly given by equation 20. As you can see, it is proportional to this, inversely proportional to this model parameter lambda, but of course it is independent of alpha. It doesn't depend on alpha. And this delta over here corresponds to the growth factor, which is a ratio of this rho I by the background total density. So if we want to see whether one can simplify this model, what is the behavior of the sound speed if it is like negligible compared to the other term. So one can at first get some idea from the analytical solution itself. So for this, as you can see, we plot consider a given mass m equal to, for example, 1 eV, possible mass, and from the bound we already have a lower bound, so we consider a value of lambda equal to 500 eV that satisfies the lower bound, that doesn't violate it. So we see for such parameter values, the sound speed square is very small throughout the entire range of evolution of the density of this redshift, for entire redshift. So one can for analytical solutions, at first one can ignore consider it to be a subdominant term in the equation. So considering the negligible effect of sound speed, and then we study two cases without baryons and with the presence of baryons. So we see equation 22 and 23 basically corresponds to the two cases. No interaction, basically same as if we consider the without baryons. So it gives rise to the same solution. As you can see, without any interaction, it just mimics the CDM behavior, which is what we expected. The delta M is proportional to A. And if we now consider interaction to be very strong with the dominating factor, then we see that the growth is much more like faster. It's proportional to 8 to the power 5/2. So the growth rate is much higher if we can in the presence of strong interaction for this theory. So it predicts a stronger and higher growth rate, and so faster formation of structures than what is normally predicted by CDM. So here, these are just general solutions for analytical solutions that we plotted over here, how this delta M goes with the redshift over here. So for this, we choose the following set of model parameter values: M equal to 1 eV, lambda equals to 500 eV, and alpha equals 10 to the minus 6. Of course, all these are considered corresponding to the bound that we already got, a lower bound on lambda and an upper bound on alpha. So this satisfies all the bounds. So as we can see that from this graph itself, that with interaction, this dotted line corresponds to with interaction. So as you can see that the perturbation in this superfluid dark matter grows at a much faster rate as compared to lambda CDM, which is this red line over here. So next, we go directly to the numerical solutions. So if what we can do better from this analytical expression. So analytically, we already saw that we have some impact on the growth for this, if we consider the interaction to be like a dominating effect in the equations. So now for numerical solutions, we of course have these two equations with us. So we try to solve these two equations. For that, in the redshift mode, of course. So for that, we need to put some initial conditions. So we considered everything at the epoch of equality. We set the initial conditions at the epoch of equality given by Z equal to 1000. And because we have, we try to constrain the parameter alpha over here, because we already saw that interaction plays an important role. So we set the value of M and lambda equal to 1 eV and 500 eV. Of course, one can try with some other value, and but the result will actually be, the behavior with respect to alpha will actually be the same. The nature would be same, whatever we obtained. Then we set delta B, which corresponds to this baryons, and this equal to delta M equal to 10 to the minus 5 from observations at this epoch of equality. And finally, H also equal to 1 eV. And one more thing, we consider a bit simplification. Because we know that the background is mainly dominated by rho M, so we consider that this background total density is basically approximately equal to this rho M density only, and it's proportional to 1 by A cube. Furthermore, we consider that this delta B has the baryonic behavior remains the same. Delta B is proportional to A. And we fix the K value at 0.0001 EV. But of course, if we can choose a higher value, or we tested with some different value of K, but the final result behavior just remained the same. So because we are mostly interested to find a bound on this alpha, so that's what our main goal over here is. So here I've shown the plot for the evolution of this, the ratio of this delta SDM to the ratio of what delta, how the growth factor evolves in lambda CDM. As you can see, this black dotted line corresponds to one value. So that is the point where it matches the value of lambda CDM. So that's what we ultimately want, because that's something we have already seen from observations. So as you can see, a value of alpha equal to 10 to the minus 8, which is given by this black dotted line, is what matches with the observation matches with lambda CDM most closely. For higher values of alpha, as you go on increasing, you see the deviation it grows to a larger and larger extent. So as deviation is much more if you for higher values of alpha. However, for a value of alpha 10 to the minus 8 or below, lambda CDM behavior would be reproduced in this superfluid case. So from here, we actually get a new upper bound on this alpha parameter for which is 10 to the minus 8 value. So similarly, we also checked the matter power spectrum, and we saw that the result again indicated that 10 to the minus 8 should be the upper bound on alpha over here. As you can see that the spectrum becomes flatter and flatter as we go to higher values of alpha. So it mimics lambda CDM when you go to this 10 to the minus 8 regime. So finally, the conclusions that we get from this cosmological study is that the plot for alpha equal to the minus 8 coincides with lambda CDM. The deviation from lambda CDM is very small, about 0.13% at z equal to 0.01, for example. So when alpha is large enough, the growth is very steep. Therefore, so alpha large means stronger interactions, so it automatically results in a very steep growth and ensures that structure formation takes place at an earlier epoch as compared to lambda CDM. And this bound that we got is different from the value that was originally quoted in Khoury's paper, in the original theory paper, what he got from just study of the background. It was stated that alpha should be less than equal to 10 to the minus 4. However, we see that with the study of perturbations, this bound is totally violated. We need the new bound that alpha should be less than equal to the minus 8 for this theory to be valid at the perturbation, cosmological perturbation study also. And as alpha we see as increased to 10 to the minus 7, the deviation from lambda CDM becomes much larger. The power spectrum plot once again reaffirms the results, previous results only. For large n of alpha, we see that it becomes relatively flatter. So this was mainly study for corresponds the constraint that we got on alpha from cosmological perturbation study. Of course, a stronger constraint or a reduced parameter space one can consider if one studies CMB, if we can consider directly go to the nonlinear regime and compare it with CMB also. That's something which we are trying to pursue in future. So that we get more stringent bounds on this both lambda as well as alpha parameters from directly comparing with data. But this gives us like a first-hand impression of what we are about to expect. We can expect from observation study also that this alpha parameter, how much impact it will be having on the study of the perturbations from this theory. So next I will go to another study where we have tried to another study of this model only, but trying to put bound from a different observation, which is recently this gravitational wave detection, this observation from this gravitational this binary neutron star merger, this GW170817. So as we know that the speed measurements there has been constraints on the relative change of the speed of gravitational wave from the binary neutron star merger, and so we tried to see how much one can constrain this superfluid dark matter model. So what happens when a gravitational wave passes through a medium? We all know that in electromagnetic waves, how they behave as they pass through a medium different from vacuum. So from this observation, from this work, we want to study how gravitational wave gets modified or speed gets modified when it is made to pass through a medium different from vacuum, and in this case it is the superfluid medium. So how its speed and how the this refractive index of the medium gets affected due to this BEC like medium through which the gravitational wave passes. Of course, we studied it for other similar BEC model, for example, the fuzzy dark matter model and the Bose-Einstein condensate model. But in this case, for this talk, because we are mainly focusing on superfluid dark matter models, so I will mainly be discussing the results corresponding to this model. It was long ago, it was proposed by Peters in his paper, how the general expression of if we consider constant density, then how the refractive index, like how it will change, what will be the effective refractive index that the gravitational wave passing through such a medium would see, and how it will be basically affecting its speed. From this idea, we converted it to the ideas in a way that, as we know, in galaxies we have density profile, so it's not a constant. So if we consider that the density is constant in a small width dr, and then we consider the average density over the entire halo region, which we consider in this case is made up of superfluid, then we can extend this study to the case of galaxies, and where the density profile is taken into consideration. So this rho r here corresponds to the galactic density profile, and this capital R here corresponds to the halo radius. It may not be the entire halo. It depends on how much, basically depends on the superfluid core. So how much the superfluid is covering the halo region. So this R is determined by that observation. And here W corresponds to the frequency of the incident gravitational wave. So as you can see, this shows the additional term is a change in the refractive index that one sees as this gravitational wave passes through this medium. So in order to study, so this was the brief background, what we will be mainly using. So because for this we need the density profile, the solution for the density profile. So we study the superfluid model for two cases: when there are no baryonic interaction and when they're in the presence of baryonic interaction. So because we know that interaction has some role. We want to see what role it plays over here, whether it can be constrained or it is not possible to constrain anything from this observation. So this Lane-Emden equation, which is the normal pressure equation that one have for for the galactic study, is given by this equation 27. So this small and big xi, they both are basically dimensionless variables. So this big xi depends on this density rho, and this rho naught is basically the central density, and this small xi is basically proportional to the r over here, radius. So the value of r, basically how it changes. So as you can see, the model parameter lambda enters over here in this redefinition. So from general halo profile, these boundary conditions are basically chosen. This is a normal boundary condition that one normally chooses for halo profile to study. And as we know that the density where it vanishes is, it was seen from the study of this Lane-Emden equation, that the numerical solution vanishes at xi1 equal to 2.75. So this would be chosen as the initial condition for getting solution of this equation 27. And this xi1 equal to 2.75 also determines the halo size, because that is where the density goes to 0. So this gives a direct expression for this capital R, the size of the halo. And finally, some more simplification, we get the following expression for this rho naught, the central density, and this halo radius in terms of the model parameters lambda, this mass. As you can see, alpha doesn't come into picture till now, because of course we are considering without any baryonic interaction. Yeah. So keeping in mind these relations for rho naught and R, we try to solve this Lane-Emden equation for these given initial conditions. So next, before going to the solutions, directly let me first discuss how the effective gravitational wave speed gets modified. So this modified refractive index for this Lane-Emden equation is given by this 29. As you can see, this is the modification term over here. And if we consider that the observation and the distance between the observer and the source from where this gravitational wave is actually emerging is given by this capital D over here, and R is the size of the halo radius. So we consider that in between, it's an approximation to get an idea. So we consider that in between it is mostly vacuum. So the effect is mainly due to this superfluid core of a superfluid halo region over here. Then the effective speed of the gravitational wave can then be defined as by equation 30, where the CG is the reduced speed of the gravitational wave through the medium. And this is of course inversely proportional to the refractive index, which we normally know. So the effective speed, total speed that this gravitational wave change that the gravitational wave sees is given by this equation 30. So finally, the change in speed compared to the speed of vacuum, so we can speed of light in vacuum, so we consider it as c equal to 1, is basically given by equation 31, which comes from this 30 only. Of course, assuming the CG is inversely proportional to 1 by n. So this will be the ultimate expression which we will be using to study the change in this delta C effective and comparing it with the constraint that we already have for the merger, binary merger. Now, before going to the solution,
Excuse me, can I ask a question on the refractive index? This due to the propagation in the halo. Where does the 1/4 frequency square come from?
Yeah, this frequency basically it comes from this which has already been derived. So it comes from the how this gravitational wave frequency basically how it interacts with the medium. So if we consider this, the interaction, the change in the refractive index of the medium due to the frequency, due to the gravitational wave. So from the derivation of, if we just go through the derivation of this refractive index change, then frequency parameter automatically comes into the picture. So here it's like you take.
Sorry, then I mean in the case of electromagnetic wave, I mean the refractive index for the electromagnetic waves is corrected because of interaction with matter, and so in that case, it is proportional to the frequency square. So I mean because of the large scattering, I mean the cross section for like a blue sky. I mean the blue light has a larger refractive index because it is high frequency. So I thought that the larger the frequency, the larger the refractive index. So I don't understand the inverse behavior in frequency in this case.
Yeah, no, for the refractive this was explicitly, this was derived for gravitational waves. And so for this case, one finally sees that this effect is basically inversely proportional to the frequency square as it enters into this modification. So this was explicitly for gravitational wave, the most like general modification how it occurs. So like in the as it passes through the a medium, so how just for gravitational waves, this was not like a general case for any waves. This was explicitly evaluated for this gravitational wave only, as it passes through the medium, how it will modify this refractive index.
I see. Because as I understand, you can, I don't know, if you think about photon and atom interaction, the effective theory, and you can integrate it out the motion of electrons in order to write down the effective Lagrangian between photon and atom, and then this effective interaction is suppressed by the electron mass. So it's a non-renormalizable interaction, and in order to get the right, like if you have consider scattering cross-section, scattering amplitude, in order to get the right dimension for the scattering amplitude with the inversely proportional, I mean with the renormalizable coupling suppressed by electron mass, you need to multiply by energy, and then the certain power in energy. and the energy is proportional to the frequency. So because of that, I think the scattering amplitude grows in frequency, leading to this frequency dependence in the medium. I mean, this is the case for the electromagnetic waves. And on the other hand, for the gravitational waves, I think this gravitational interaction is also not renormalizable, suppressed by the Planck scale square, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that it should be similar to the electromagnetic waves, but it's maybe my intuition is not that correct. But
Yeah, so this was actually in this paper, it was shown that this refractive index is basically what finally comes out, taking into consideration the scattering and everything after some approximation. So this was like obtained after certain approximations and simplifications. It was shown that finally the inversely proportional to the frequency square in this is the modification.
So it seems that because I see. So here maybe, so it is proportional to the energy density. The energy density is the energy to the force, and the frequency square is energy square.
Yeah.
So energy to the force divided by energy square, that is energy square. And the Newton constant is 1/, mass square. So you got the dimension correct. So I think in this case, the interaction depends on the matter energy density. On the other hand, for the electromagnetic interaction, I'm not sure. So it may be different, but okay.
Yeah, there are some certain approximations, of course, that goes into this picture, but finally it turns out to be this.
Okay, I see. So maybe this approximation might be valid for certain frequencies. Maybe it's okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So this equation 31 corresponds to the final effective change in the gravitational wave speed. So considering this expression, final relation that we get, we go to this study of what happens with baryonic interaction. Of course, I will directly just discuss the Lane-Emden equation. So of course, we get a new extra term over here given by this interaction part. As you can see in equation 32, because of this, it doesn't becomes just a direct solution. So once needs to solve it iteratively. This rho naught and r, the expressions over here now gets modified by this equation 33, as you can see. So first, in order to solve this, we first consider the solution without any interaction, and then we put back this, we obtain the solution for this small xi and this big xi correspondingly. Then we put back the solution of this small xi and big xi into the total equation given by 32. And then with each iteration, we try to see how much accuracy we can achieve for this rho and r over here. So, and finally, in this way, iteratively solving this equation 32, we obtain the solution for this for the resulting solution for this equation 32 over here, this modified Lane-Emden equation with baryonic interaction. So we have I will be directly discussing the plots over here. So before that, the observational values that we used corresponds to the value for this binary merger. So this frequency we assume to be as 100 Hertz, and this DL over here, this luminosity distance is 40 megaparsec. And a redshift of z equal to 0.01, and as we already know that delta C effective from observation, we know it's approximately 10 to the minus 15. So taking into consideration these observed values, we then do the plots for the resulting what we get, what constraint we can get for the model parameters. So without baryonic interaction, we get these two plots. So here there are no alpha over here. So this first one corresponds to lambda m parameter space. So this blue region corresponds to the allowed region, and this red part corresponds to the excluded part. So as we can see, for any given mass, we already have we have a bound on this lambda value that can be allowed, that is allowed by this observation. For example, in the second plot, we have shown for a given mass, we get how the upper bound that we get on lambda. So as you can see from cosmology or any other observation till now, we only have a lower bound on lambda. But from this gravitational wave study, we have now for the first time an upper bound on this lambda, which, as you can see, for example, for a given mass of 0.6 eV, this upper bound turns out to be around 10 to the power 29 over here. So as you can see that though this parameter space is still large over here, but this is like a first step to reduce the parameter space. So now we have an upper bound from this without baryonic interaction. But of course, one can, for example, this was the most general case without any particular like we can on the other way we can go, like for example we can choose a given value of r. For example, we can consider the radius, the halo radius, and then from here we directly get a relation between this lambda and m. So from there also we can constrain lambda. But these solutions that we obtain, we didn't choose for any particular rho or r. So this was the most general solution that we get just from the solution of the Lane-Emden equations that we have. So this is valid for any r that we get. So depending on the value of lambda, one can find the corresponding halo radius also directly using the formula. As you can see that this red region is the excluded region. However, there the allowed region is still a lot of parameter space from this. But the good point over here is that we get now an upper bound, a limit. So it's not like we don't have any upper limit on lambda. So we have a particular bound constraint on this value of lambda. So similarly with baryonic interaction also we get the solutions. So as you can see, this once again the blue regions are the allowed regions and the red ones are the excluded portions. So this first plot corresponds to the lambda alpha parameter space for a given mass, and the second plot corresponds to m alpha parameter space for a given lambda. I have not shown the lambda alpha parameters, lambda m parameter space for a given alpha, because the nature is just similar to what we got in this figure A over here. So here, as you can see, that the bound, though there is a distinct exclusion region, but it is independent of the value of alpha. So for any value of alpha, the bound on this lambda or on this mass, it just remains the same. It is irrespective, it's independent of the value of alpha. So that's something we got from here, that we are unable to put any new bounds on alpha through the gravitational wave observations. However, an upper bound on lambda is something which we got new from this study of this model through this observation. So I will quickly discuss the results that we got from here. So in this work, we have calculated, what we have done is calculated the relative change in the speed of gravitational wave with respect to vacuum using the Lane-Emden equation, and tried to put bounds on the three free parameters of this model from observational data of binary neutron star GW170817. Now, in the absence of any interaction, as we saw that from the plot, what we see is that the lower the mass of the DM particles, the higher is the upper bound on lambda. Thus, what we can say from the plot, that the lower masses are more preferred. So for example, for m equal to 10 to the minus 2 eV, and the upper bound on lambda is 10 to the 34 MeV. Now, upon including interaction, we find that the upper bound on lambda for m of 0.6 eV is lambda should be less than equal to 10 to the 28 MeV. So this is the new bound that we get from this study. And this is, of course, independent of the value of alpha. So this implies that this observation cannot provide any new bound on the parameter alpha. The bound that we got already from is from the cosmological sector. However, from this part, we didn't get any new bound on the parameter alpha. Finally, the alpha m plot corresponds to lambda equal to 10 to the power 30 MeV, which we saw which I showed you just now. This plot corresponds to this B. And we see that for this case, the upper bound on mass of the DM particle is m should be less than equal to 0.25 eV. So these are the results that we got from this study. So as I said, that's in these two works, I have tried to put bounds on this model parameters of the superfluid theory. One was from this gravitational wave studies, changing the speed of light, and the other was from the cosmological perturbations. Of course, these are like there are like many more observations. For example, at present one have this Hubble tension, and then there is this observation of the complete, if we consider the total CMB power spectrum, and then there is this also the gravitational lensing. So one can further constrain this model and try to obtain more stringent bounds by going into these areas, which is something that we are also planning to do in near future. So hopefully we will obtain some more. We will be able to reduce the parameter space to a larger extent with these new observations. So thank you for your attention. So this was all from my side.
So thank you very much for nice talk. Is there any question or comment? Actually, okay, please go on. I have a very naive question in the starting point of the Lagrangian, maybe equation 3 or 4. Yeah, you choose the how to say, the non-analytical form of the something like equation 3. So I understand that it's phenomenologically motivated, but can we derive from some fundamental setup to this?
In the original paper of Khoury, so he has shown that it can be derived from a relativistic theory also, like from it corresponds to spontaneous U1 symmetry breaking. So if one considers hexic interactions and then one studies, one try to derive in the non-relativistic regime up to first order modifications of this field, then one can actually like get this kind of behavior. But of course, this exact power of this x3/2 is something that has been like mostly derived from the how it behaves at the galactic regime, so to get the Mondian behavior. So this was like a phenomenological proposal, but it has been shown in the original theory that from relativistic study also one can get this kind of a like equation 3 kind of a Lagrangian from relativistic interaction, like from relativistic picture.
So you mentioned the sextic potential.
I mean hexic interactions, if you can like cubic and then higher interactions from there, it has been like shown in the theory original paper that from there with some like non-relativistic approximation from the relativistic version, one can get this equation 3 like form for this Lagrangian.
Okay, so in that sense, that theta can be regarded as the Goldstone model. From the U1 symmetry breaking. And is there any, how to say, criteria to specify the interaction between theta and baryon? So it's a simple, I understand that this is a simple setup, but for example, you may consider derivative coupling or
it was mainly like the main idea was considering that how the baryons, for example, superfluid forms vortex. So if the baryons couple to this vortex, then this kind of a coupling of this, like with a cos theta term will cos this rho beta kind of a term will come. So from there only this idea was mainly proposed. So how the baryons will get coupled to the vortex of this superfluid. With like first order term from this interaction. So only the first order behavior was considered over here for this kind of interaction. So main motivation was mainly that. So how this will get, the baryons will get coupled here.
So So equation 4 is not related to Galilean symmetry, right? Galilei.
No, equation 4 is like equation 3 was mainly it was tested that it satisfies all the symmetries, but equation 4 was not motivated from there.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other question?
So actually, yeah, thank you for your nice talk, seminar. I think that I need to study this more carefully. But you introduce 3 parameters.
Yeah.
The mass scale, 2 mass scale, 1 is coupling constant,
Yeah.
and this lambda that you introduced is a Mond scale, right? This is Mond scale in order to explain small scale problem, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you don't want to solve the small scale problem, like if you have a baryon feedback, I mean that for cold dark matter, it is known that the baryonic feedback is enough to explain the small scale problem. So if it is the case, you can the lambda, right? It is lambda. How does you fixed kind of this lambda is fixed for Mond solution, right? So what is the typical value of a lambda in order to solve the small scale problem? That is my first question, and the second question is to what extent I mean you try to constrain this parameter phenomenologically.
Yeah.
But what is the favored range of the this lambda parameter
At the galactic
before consideration of this phenomenological bound?
Yeah, so at the galactic level, as we know, we don't have any particular value of lambda unless we know the mass. So it's like they're related. So for example, as I shown that if we consider a mass of around 1 eV, the typical value of lambda should be somewhere around something like greater than like 500 eV. So that's the typical value of lambda. That depends on the mass. So if we consider some other lower mass range, then you get a different value of lambda. So for a given mass m equal to 1 eV, then lambda can be around a value of around 500 eV is something that doesn't violate any bound. So as you saw that from the cosmological or from the galactic scale also, one gets like a lower bound on lambda. So it's like a bound. So we don't get exactly any particular value, but we get a bound, right? Depends on the mass. So that's a typical range that, so it also has temperature dependence at the galactic scale. So if we consider the effect of temperature, then also from there also we get a relation of lambda with the temperature. The typical value is like somewhere around 500 eV or so. One can assume it to be that.
I see. Okay. I see. So for galaxy scales, you can think about typical temperature, or critical temperature at the galaxy scales, and then you can also constrain the particle mass. For given particle mass, the lambda scale also determined, because lambda appears in several places. So it lambda appears in the equation of state. And also it appears in the interaction. The equation 4 is a kind of way of parameterizing the interaction.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so I think what is interesting is in your work is you said in comparison to Justin Curry's original bound on lambda alpha, just from the background study, you said the perturbation is important, right?
Yeah. Because if we consider that bound only, we see that in the perturbation, it like deviates a lot. So it violates the perturbation observation from the lambda CDM. Yeah.
So it's a background, the bound from the background exists because this energy density is rolling in a, it's a custom at the cosmological scales, right? I mean, I think you can think about evolution at the galaxy scale, or you could think about evolution at the cosmological scales.
Yeah.
Maybe the spore fluid dark matter is everywhere, maybe, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So at the cosmological scales, so it could, I mean, I don't know, I don't have a picture on the energy density well, so if this spore fluid dark matter is dominant, then it changes the equation of state.
Yes.
Right, and then we don't have a radiation, we don't have a matter dominance anymore. So I think that roughly this is how you put a bound on the equation of state, right?
Yes.
And then also energy density.
Yeah.
Okay. So did you talk to Corey about this perturbation? Justin Corey.
I think he was the one who reviewed our paper. So during that time, we had some interaction. So he also gave us some input, and then finally, yeah.
I see. Okay. Actually, I wanted to ask many questions during his talk in Paris, but because he is remote, he was giving a remote talk. Actually, I couldn't ask many questions. But here, I think what you said is interesting. Also, for the refractive index of the gravitational waves, my question is of course, I'm wondering about this frequency dependence first. I want to check this. Normally, I mean, this is not, it's not what I expected from the beginning. And the second one is you want to know, you need to know document the halo profile from the merger of neutron stars all the way to us. So as I remember, you took like distance is like 40 megaparsec, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's an extragalactic scale. And do you know, how do you know, I mean, are you sure about the dark halo profile all the way?
No, that's an approximation that we used. We considered that in between the merger and this galaxy where we are observing, so it's mostly the speed is not affected. So main of the speed affection, like whatever the change occurs in the speed is due to this halo. So we don't consider the in between, whatever is there, we consider subdominant and consider it to be like a vacuum kind of a thing. So for this, because of course the total would be if we consider all whatever is there in between, but like it will be too much of a complicated, I don't know whether we will ultimately be able to get any result or anything, because ultimately we are mostly considering the effect of this superfluid halo. So we consider that that is a dominating effect for this case. That's an approximation that we used.
So this the neutron star bi-merge, I mean the binary merger of neutron stars kind of immersed in a dark matter halo far away from us, and then you need to know what is the size of the dark matter halo and the dark matter halo profile in that particular region. Right. It's a rough estimation, or is there any observational I mean input for that particular halo?
No, like
I mean, you have just a free parameter, like do you have just free parameter like energy density and the radius of the dark matter halo?
Yeah, as I said that if we consider a particular halo radius, we can also like use a relation. We have a relation between how this radius and mass and lambda are related. So if we consider particular halo radius,
I
then
see, I
we
see.
can of course
I can-
get
I
the
can
other
see.
way around also. Yeah, but
I see, I
whatever we
see.
did was just a general for
I
any
see.
unknown halo radius. So one
Mm.
can get this how the
Mm.
bound or lambda.
I see. Okay, I see. I see. So we need more information.
Yeah, yeah.
I see. Okay. That's clear. Yeah. I was looking for the literature on how to calculate the refractive index
Okay.
for gravity. Yeah. But yeah.
It is if you want, you can go through this this paper which I mentioned over here. Yeah, I think
Okay.
here it has been derived in detail, like this thing.
Okay, I will take a look.
Okay, so is there any other question or comment? If not, let's thank today's speaker, Shurya. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you, Shreya. Shreya is your first name? Or
yeah,
last name?
first, yeah,
First name,
first,
Shreya.
yeah.
Okay, nice to meet you. And thank you for your nice talk. And hopefully you can come to Korea when the situation is better.
Yeah, of
And
course.
you are also encouraged to apply to positions in Korea.
Yeah,
Today.
so you all also will be giving ads, right?
Sorry?
You all also will be giving ads for positions.